Coming up, the quest for pepper leads to unexpected discoveries. America and the uncharted ocean beyond it. There are epic stories in everything around us and every place we go. This is Joe. He doesn't know these stories and won't get a chance to learn them because today he will die. The story of the modern restaurant, for instance, begins after the French Revolution. With the fall of the ruling class, personal chefs found themselves out of work. They opened eateries where all could be served food prepared by professionals. There are many more items of interest inside the restaurant. But the ones with the most amazing tales to tell are among the smallest. Take salt, for example. It is one of the most common minerals on Earth. So it may be a surprise that until recently, salt was very difficult to come by. Because it was so difficult to take from the earth and use, salt became exceptionally valuable.
You can go from present-day life, where you have salt everywhere, to the rest of human history as of 100 years ago, when salt was almost impossible to come by. Because of the scarcity of salt and because of our dependence on it, it's been of strategic value since the dawn of time. Actually, the very first documented war ever fought was over salt in China, some several thousand years ago. Salt was such a precious commodity in many places that it was actually exchanged as a form of currency for people. So a good example of that would be the Romans, who would often pay their soldiers, at least partially, in salt. It would get a salt ration, and that's the origin of the word salary, salarium. The Romans understood very early on that if they controlled salt production, they controlled an entire economy. It would be traded ounce for gold.
A reminder of how rare salt used to be is still with us today in a ritual from the time of Christ. Few people now know why we throw salt over our shoulder. In biblical times, nothing came easy. One had to work very hard to afford basic necessities like salt, which was so valuable that spilling it was considered the work of the devil, creeping up and pushing you from behind. The remedy then was to throw a pinch of salt over your shoulder, which would blind Satan and drive him back to his fiery pit. To early man, losing even this little bit of salt was a source of great dismay. But this is no longer the case.
We manufacture salt now on a huge industrial scale. Salt is used as the foundation for many of the chemicals and materials that we use in our modern day lives. From glass to plastics to dyes and textiles and paper. It's used by millions of tons to de-ice roads.
Today, the mineral that wars were once fought over is so common we can waste it for nothing more than a few moments' amusement. Of course, what amuses one person does not necessarily amuse another. Salt is not the only item on our table once considered among our most valuable commodities. People would once do anything to give their food a little flavor. Many men have risked and often lost their lives to get their hands on spices.
When average people just started to get access to pepper and other spices, it was like, it was like winning the lottery back then. People would spend their money on things that made them feel happy. And the only thing that really made you feel happy in those days was eating well. And so eating well meant spicing your food up. By having spice in their life, by putting spice in the food, it elevated their cuisine from really pretty horrible to excellent. It was as important as anything that they ever had back in the day, and that's why spices were worth what they were worth. People were willing to pay almost anything to get spice so they can have something good to eat every day.
For most of human history, spices were only available to those who lived near their source. By the late 1400s, brave men traveled great distances and faced extraordinary dangers to bring spices home. One of these voyages resulted in the European discovery of America.
When Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, he was looking for the Spice Islands, and instead he found Cuba and the United States. He thought he was going to find pepper, Piper nigrum, the little black pepper. Instead of finding pepper, he found chilies, and when he tasted it, he said, aha, it's hot, it reminds me of the sensation of pepper. When it has absolutely nothing to do with pepper, he just said, I'm going to name this pepper. It's a different form of pepper, and hope that Queen Isabella didn't notice.
Many other dangerous voyages were launched in the quest to bring spices to Europe. But no man was more determined or paid a higher price than Ferdinand Magellan. Magellan's plan was to become the first man to travel around the world. But his motive was not exploration, it was commerce. Magellan wanted nutmeg. With 5 ships carrying a crew of 234, he left Spain in 1519, and after avoiding an opposing Portuguese fleet, sailed westward to South America. On the coast of Argentina, Magellan put down a mutiny and executed at least one of his ship's captains. In November 1520, Magellan became the first European to cross into the Pacific from the Atlantic. And there he found nothing. No one anticipated that the ocean, which Magellan named Pacific for its calm waters, would be so vast and so empty. The Pacific voyage Magellan thought would take a few days became 4 months. Food quickly ran out. The crew was forced to eat rat droppings, moldy biscuits, sawdust, and bits of leather from the sails. Their only water was yellow and putrid. Magellan's crew sailed for more than 3 months without fresh food or water until finally reaching Guam, where the remaining 150 crew members were at last able to eat and drink their fill. They set sail again for the Spice Islands, but first made one terrible mistake. They stopped in the Philippines. Magellan and his crew got involved in a war between rival kings, in which Magellan would meet his fate, getting hacked to bits by the opposing army. Of the 234 men that set sail, only 18 made it back to Spain. They were the first men to sail around the world, but at that time, their greatest feat was returning with a boatload of nutmeg. Today, pepper and other spices are so common that no one has to risk their lives or lie to royalty to get them. Now, we barely have time to think about the foods we eat and how they came to have the flavors they do, allowing our minds to wander to other things. Like Joe's is right now. What he's not thinking about, but should be, is the thing that is so often on all our minds: money. We rarely ask ourselves why these pieces of paper have value. To answer this, we must first come to understand the many millennia it took humanity to arrive at what we all know as money.
Money began when people doing barter trade needed something of value to even out transactions of uneven value. If I had a chicken and I was bartering with somebody with a cow, my chicken wasn't worth as much as his cow. So I had to come up with a system of giving him something of value that he would accept. What happened was money began first as shells and then other trinkets of value. In order to have it accepted more widely, it began to be minted in metals of value: gold, copper, silver, tin. There were a number of them. For thousands of years, money was valuable. It was backed by precious metals. But in 1971, something happened.
Next, the story of a wild man, a beautiful woman, and the drink that links us all together. Most people don't realize that the simplest things around us have epic stories to tell. Instead, we go about our business, happily unaware. And as day becomes night, we hope that this business turns into fun. For many of us, a night of fun begins with a withdrawal of cash from an ATM. Several millennia ago, to make a transaction, one would begin by dragging livestock to the marketplace. The modern process is much simpler. People who use ATMs spend an average of 25% more than people who don't. With cash so readily available, we rarely have occasion to question what this money represents, or if it represents anything at all. For many millennia, money did represent items of value. The U.S. could only print as much money as it had gold. But in 1971, with the cost of the Vietnam War and the weakening of U.S. currency, Richard Nixon removed the dollar from the gold standard.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets.
Now, the U.S. can print as much money as it wants, and it does not have to be tied to anything of value.
Money is just a marker for transactions. It used to be based on gold, but after 1971, it was allowed to float in the marketplace. It's no longer based on anything but faith. And it was international trade on a day-to-day basis that set the value of the dollar, and does till this day. Every empire since the days of the Romans who were on a fiat currency, which is a currency based just on faith, has sort of backed into a dilemma where people continue to push the value of the currency until some sort of a bubble-like event happens.
Despite this, money is quite good at enabling men to make wagers. And there are few things men enjoy wagering over more than games of skill.